I've set about building myself a boat. The boat in question is a Welsford Walkabout by New Zealand designer John Welsford. It's about 5 metres long, 1.5 wide. John states that it's possible to build this with a hull weight of around 110 kilograms. So it'll be light enough for me to launch on and off a trailer single-handed. It's plywood construction or plywood substrate. There's a generous coating of epoxy applied on top of that, which should give it the maintenance characteristics of a plastic boat rather than a traditional wooden boat. It's really a large dinghy, hopefully a large seaworthy dinghy. That's what I'm hoping from this. But yeah, we'll find out when we actually get it in the water. The construction is relatively straightforward as far as boats go. There's a large flat bottom panel. I say flat, you can see on the top plan here there's a bit of curve. There's a skeg here as well at the back, so it's actually the next line up. You can see there's a bit of curve fore to aft. That curve is held in place while you're building it on a building jig, which is just a table that you build before you start assembling the boat, and there's uprights on that table that hold the bottom plank in place. Onto that bottom plank sit bulkheads. You can see on the plan here B1, B2, B3, etc. And they are just like cross sections through the boat hull, the shape of which are cut out again in plywood. And these are sat upright on that flat bottom panel and then joined together with wooden stringers which fit into notches in the bulkheads, and then round the outside of that more plywood planking. What you see here is probably the world's slowest CNC machine. I made this years ago for cutting arbitrary shapes out of sheet materials, and it works surprisingly well for what it is. I spent like a couple of €100 on it, like €200 or something, and it gives me a millimetre or so accuracy, which is more than good enough for what I need here. The long axis, which is up and down the screen here, just runs on a piece of angle iron down the right hand side, and you can see caster wheels on the left, and then across the screen it's running on these pieces of square section steel tubing, which I can plug extra bits into and deploy it larger if I had a shed big enough these days to deploy it larger in. It's actually moving by being pulled up these toothed belts, stepper motors with timing pulleys, interfaced with little notches in these belts. You can kind of just see the notches in the center of the screen there. Look, it's not a professional CNC machine, but the cut quality is more than good enough with a bit of sanding. And speaking of sanding, that's me sat in the garden doing some sanding. And it produced a box of parts far quicker than I could have cut these out by hand with a jigsaw. So I'm just assembling the last bulkhead I've got to do on the boat. So these are all, they're like 9mm plywood with doublers in place for some of it. I'm finding the best approach here is actually, before you even mix the epoxy, get some screw holes drilled. These are going to be screwed together instead of clamping. So I'm going to be gluing these on with some thickened epoxy. I'm using the West System epoxy. I've got the little pumps for it to save measuring, makes things a lot easier. and thickened with 4 to 6 colloidal silica. No idea how you pronounce that. Anyway, yeah, that powder thickens the epoxy, makes nice glue. So yeah, that's going to be spread over all these doublers, and then rather than clamp them down, I'm screwing them down, which has the same effect. Reason I'm screwing rather than clamping, I don't have enough clamps, but also once I've got these stuck down, if I don't have clamps all over the place, I can then put a layer of unthickened epoxy over the whole thing. Reason I'm coating everything with unthickened epoxy is I'm going to be assembling this boat outside, and where I live it's always raining, or it's just really unreliable weather, so I don't want to risk the wood getting too damp for me to then coat an epoxy later. So here is one I made earlier. You can see that has a coat of epoxy everywhere. So yeah, I've kind of done the same thing here. These clamping screws, I've just left them in. They're nothing special. They're not a stainless steel screw, but I'm thinking they're going to be encased in epoxy. This is kind of what I had kicking about. These are 20mm screws, whereas 2 layers of 9mm plywood, I'm having to just clip the ends off with a set of snips. So yeah, probably a lot less messing around if I just got some screws the right length. But anyway, these are what I had, and it was quicker just to go and shorten them all and go buy another box of screws. I was struggling to find any rudder mounting hardware for sale, so I gave up and set about making some. So yeah, this is one of these, just hasn't had the leaves folded up yet. So this will go here somewhere. This will go here. This is the transom of the boat. Haven't decided yet if I'll put the permanent pin on this side or on the rudder side that slots down into that. So I've kept these holes on the small side for now. Yeah, so these are 316 stainless, and I'll probably, whatever pin I go with, I'll probably make out of the same. So for the rudder brackets in the transom, I drilled the holes oversize. I then stuck a piece of masking tape over the back side. I filled the hole like 3/4 of the way up with thickened epoxy. Maybe I should have gone a bit higher actually. Then put a little bit of grease over the back side of the bracket so it wouldn't stick. I very lightly coated some of the bolts in grease. These aren't the final bolts I'll use, but anyway, there's a come back. There's a threaded section to these and an unthreaded section. Ideally, maybe it would have been better with threaded all the way. Anyway, these are what I had. And then I dropped them down into the wet epoxy. So it has created a hole. It's created a threaded hole. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to screw these part way in, and then I'm going to just put, well, first of all, I don't know if you can see in these holes, some of them, they're not very even, they're a bit raggy. Also, just to get rid of any trace of amine blush along the top side of the epoxy there, I'll just clean these up with a drill bit the same size as I drilled the hole in the wood. Just take a very light skim off the top of the epoxy. I'll then screw the bolts most of the way in, and then I'll just again, these bolts will still have a bit of the grease on them. And then I'll just pour some very lightly thickened epoxy in the top, just until it's flush with the top here. And that should be that. I'll still, although there's a thread in the epoxy, I have no idea how strong that'll be. I suspect it'd actually be quite strong, but I will be putting like washers and bolts on the back as well. This is what the back side looks like. I just need to clean up the ends of the holes a little bit. So yeah, I had a piece of masking tape over the top here. So that's the bolt holes for the rudder pintles and gudgeons finished off. I could have probably done with a tiny bit more epoxy in that one, but still it's not bad. But yeah, you can kind of see how they've all filled up. There's actually this bolt is actually screwed down into the thread that's cast into the epoxy. When the boat's actually in the water, it'll be very rare that this one's underwater, but yeah, this one could conceivably be underwater from time to time. So I'll put a little O-ring between the bracket and transom, and I'll make the O-ring fairly snug onto the bolt as well, so as it gets squished and deformed, it'll form a seal on here, on the bolt, and on the bracket itself. I'll probably grease the bolts as well, so you know it's already a very tight fit between the bolt and the epoxy, but yeah, a bit of grease there would stop water ingress as well. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that. Cool, so I think that's me done with the transom till I eventually come to screw it onto the boat. It's a really showery day today, so I'm using the time to just scrub some of the amine blush off some of the bulkheads. This one, I've actually scrubbed most of this one before, but then I realised I'd missed a doubler, so this one, sort of like below this line, has been scrubbed, and I think a light sand as well actually. Above this point, this is still just the epoxy as it's cured, so just a bit of masking tape. You'll notice, try and get a bit where the rain hasn't landed. There you go, that bit's still dry. So this, see how it's just not really sticking to that. That's because of the amine blush, the waxy film that forms over the top of the epoxy. Down here, that has been, see now if I shove that, it's not wrinkling up, and I don't know if the microphone picks this up or not. You can actually hear that that's stuck down. Cool. So yeah, it's as simple as scrubbing it with a bit of soap and water. That's just like an abrasive pad. Some soap, some water in the watering can down there. So let's get back to it. So here are all the bulkheads. Well, actually bulkhead and transom laid out. So bulkhead 1, which at the front, through to bulkhead 6, and the transom at the back, the stern. So I've just cut my scarf joint, which will join the two halves of the bottom plank together. Here I have, there's actually, this is the bow, this is the stern piece. So on top of each other, I've got some angled wedges, exactly the same both sides, here and here. These are sort of like a 1-in-8 slope. So this is the top sheet of plywood, finishes at this line here. So this is just like an even cut at that angle. And then same again on the bottom sheet. So I'm gonna get some glue on here, and then this sheet will get flipped over onto here, clamp that up, and we've then got a piece of timber at the length of the boat. The way I made that, I've got a little, the way I cut that, I've got a little trim rudder, sort of like a long end mill coming through. I've got a little bit of wax on here and here. Just a little bit of beeswax just to make it a bit slidier. And then this basically just goes that way. I can move this up and down, increase it, like just moving it over by a small amount each time. Yeah, worked pretty well. Cool. Let's get these glued together. So, scarf joint complete. First time doing one of those, but yeah, it's not perfect, but that'll do. Strong enough. Yeah, don't look out of there, it's a bit messy. It's a pretty damp, miserable day here today, hence me recording and editing together this YouTube video instead of doing proper work on the boat. This is about as far as I've got. The bottom plank is sitting there on the bilge jig. You can actually see here on the bilge jig the little uprights that hold the longitudinal curve in the bottom plank. Next thing I need to do is screw the bottom plank down onto the jig and then start sitting the bulkheads vertically on top of that. That's all I got for this video. I think people have been asking me how the build has been going, so I'm going to edit all this together and post it on YouTube.